All right, AP World, one last time for unit number 8. All right, finished you off on the last section dealing with the Middle East. It's really where we're focused on the creation of Israel and a lot of the conflict that has spun out since then. As we head here into our last section, um, two topics. All right, you got communism and then land reform movements. Kind of a thrilling way of ending up Unit 8. All right. So let's start with the spread of communism first, shall we? First of all, I don't know. This is sometimes I question College Board and how they order things because this unit especially chronologically seems to be just jumping all over the place. Because I mean, we've talked about the Korean War and we've talked about China's support of North Korea, North Vietnam, and also now we're going back to by the way, let's create the nation of modern China, the People's Republic of China. So yeah, we were definitely putting the cart in front of the horse. So anyhow, if I get back to the story where it was when we first introduced you to Mao Zedong there, although the last picture you saw of him I think was a much younger looking Mao Zedong. He had taken lead of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, during as a result of the Long March and all that business, and had been fighting that civil war against Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang, the nationalist government of China. They had paused that civil war, when World War II was breaking out. Japan invading China in 1937. One of the reasons that Japan never conquers China completely is because you've got the communists and the nationalists fighting basically side by side. And while Japan is able to conquer some of China, they never are able to get all of it. Well, as soon as World War II ends and the Japanese are gone, the Civil War starts right back up again. And it's like, stop shooting at those guys and turn around and start shooting at these guys, just like we were before the other guys showed up. And that Civil War will rage for a few more years at the end of World War II. But by 1949, the communists, with a lot of peasant support, have been able to overwhelm the nationalists. And at that point, Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists retreat to what was then called the island of Formosa, which we know as Taiwan, and establish themselves there and call themselves the true government of China. And when they say China, they mean not just the island. They say we are still the government of all of China. And then Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party is going to establish themselves as what they will call the one true legitimate government of China. And when they say China, they mean all of mainland China and Taiwan. And that is the stance that those two have pretty much continued to hold to this very day. Which is why you've got some experts that sometimes talk about the fact that Taiwan could be what triggers World War III, kind of one of those hot spots in the world. And the Chinese, the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Republic of China, have threatened many times to attack and invade Taiwan and to basically force them into the fold, that kind of thing. All right. Anyhow, that's where we get a revolution in China. And by 1949, like I said, the People's Republic of China, whose flag you'll see there kind of in the background behind Mao Zedong. All right. Mao Zedong, I think we mentioned in class before, this is the guy that even though he always has this very kind of placid, benign expression on his face, this is what most historians ascribe to be the number one killer in all of world history. That this guy is responsible for more human death and suffering, than Genghis Khan, definitely Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin. I mean, that's kind of you're getting up there in some of the top bad guys of history, but no one touches Mao Zedong. We see how this plays out in the 1950s, and particularly just kind of at the tail end of the 1950s. Once Mao and the communists gain control over China, they want to replicate a kind of a version of what Stalin had done with the 5-year plans, and so to kind of rush into an industrialization program to modernize and try to get China caught up to the 20th century, which I mean, large portions of it just feel like you could close your eyes and you'd be in the 1800s, or yeah. I mean, it's kind of like big parts of China, like the land that time forgot, and Mao wants to change that, but he sets unrealistic goals. And because very quickly the kind of government that he operates is authoritarian at its heart, and allows for really, there's no room for failure. And so as he starts pulling farmers, and then parts of these are kind of mirror a little bit of what we see going on even in the Soviet Union, where farmers are forced out of the fields and into factories that the Chinese are starting to build. And food production begins to lag behind. The ministers of the Chinese government, whose job it is to report to Mao and the top leaders of matters related to food production, are afraid to tell him how bad it's getting, that there's not enough agricultural workers to produce the wheat and the grains and everything to feed the massive population of China. And so they kind of just fudge, and when the reports are how are things going out there, they just report back and say, yep, it's all going splendidly, until it isn't. And in 1958, China begins to be roiled by a massive famine, and it's mainly out in the western central parts of China, the more agricultural parts. You won't feel the negative impacts of this as much on the eastern, kind of the seaboard side of China, where you've got your big cities like Shanghai and Beijing and that sort of thing. But inland in the agricultural areas, the famine just wreaks havoc. And estimates are kind of in different places, but most historians peg the death toll to be around 30 million. Okay. And, and you could be saying, well, what does Mao have to do with that? But I mean, really, it's not, first of all, it's Mao's orders that kind of destroy the balance in terms of, agricultural workers versus factory workers and what is needed just to feed the country. And also, his responsibility that he creates a system where his own, leaders are afraid to tell him the truth, because they're afraid they will suffer personally if the truth is difficult to take. And so, so right there, just with the Great Leap Forward, he's responsible for more death than Hitler probably was, between the Holocaust and Germany's role in World War II. Okay. The next one there is the Cultural Revolution, and this comes after the Great Leap Forward. Mao is actually punished by the other top leadership. I mean, he is the guy who's at the tippity top, but after the Great Leap Forward, he's kind of like putting on a timeout. It's kind of odd how they pull this. I mean, they don't just fire him, or they don't say you're gone. He maintains position of being the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, and as a result, the leader of the country. But his role is kind of diminished, and to punish him for what had been just a foolish series of mistakes and that sort of thing. Well, fast forward about 5-6 years, and Mao is trying to figure out how to get himself back into that position where he his rule is unquestioned, and this is where the Cultural Revolution comes in. What Mao begins to argue is that China is beginning to kind of lose its shine, and it's because it's because they're forgetting the lessons of the revolution that had put them in place back in 1949. And so what he calls for is a new revolution. Basically, he calls for almost what he refers to as almost like permanent revolution. And this is going to set Chinese, especially young Chinese people. This is going to be really, really popular amongst teenagers and students in China, where he pretty much encourages them to go after property owners, people who have wealth, because it's kind of like you're not supposed to have that in communism. Everyone's supposed to kind of everything is distributed evenly, and everyone has just what they need and nothing more, nothing less. That kind of thinking. And it unleashes a wave of violence across China as these kind of warriors of the Cultural Revolution, all of them armed with the little red book you see over there on the right side, a little red book that was printed up by the millions and issued to Chinese citizens, and it was just a little book that has all these little, I don't know, little pearls of wisdom from the mouth of Mao Zedong. I mean, really, that's kind of what it is. It's just a collection of his writings and his thoughts, and they marched around everywhere with these little red books. But by the time the Cultural Revolution ends in 1976 is significant because that's the year Mao dies. It's figured that upwards about another 20 million Chinese die during the Cultural Revolution. Most of them is through violence. Whether they are some of those people who are targeted by the soldiers of the Cultural Revolution, or whether it's people who just get caught in the middle of all of the insanity. The Cultural Revolution is called halt after Mao dies by those who come after him. All right, but that puts a number around 50 to some people say 60 to 70 million, and that definitely puts him in that area of again the ultimate bad guy. If we're just thinking of a body count. He's got it. He's got it, and it's not even really too close. All right. The very last section we'll cover here is land reform and land reform movements that we see take place in around the world in those post-World War II years and kind of right on up into the 1980s. Give you just kind of like a little definition there of what we're talking about with this. And kind of like, this was a little bit of what was going on even with that Cultural Revolution, was a little bit of some reform and the idea that, the traditional old landowners, that we've learned about in so many different parts of the world, that idea of taking it from them and giving it to those who have been without. Okay. And so we'll look at a few examples of this. First one we'll look at is in Iran, and what comes to be known as the White Revolution. In Iran, back in the 1950s, you have the Shah of Iran there pictured up there, who was the leader and fairly well supported by the United States. It's the 1950s. He's an avowed communist hater. And so, that's all we need to know. And, with the Cold War raging, we throw in behind him. But the revolution that he pretty much powers is this idea of buying land from landowners and then reselling it to the poorer people of Iran. Okay, and hold on just a sec here. I had a dog need to go outside. Anyhow, Iran. So the Shah, who, I mean, he kind of, as a leader of Iran, I mean, he does make a lot of real positive changes. Gives a lot more rights to women than what you see in a lot of other parts of the Middle East. Some of that sort of thing. And he wants to try to help the poorer people of Iran. And so this idea of buying back, in effect, land from landowners and then being able to resell it to peasants, at prices that they can afford. And part of this is also, I mean, he has a self-motivation for this. The landowners have a lot of political power in Iran, and he wants to water that down and, further cement his own position as the leader. And so, he's like we've learned in many other parts of the world and different times in history, the landowners aren't too down with this plan, and there's a lot of resistance, not violent resistance, but political pushback. In the end, it definitely creates this kind of groundswell of anger at the Shah. It only brings kind of a small percentage of land that peasants ever really do get their hands on. But they refer to it as the White Revolution. And really it's because, it is this attempt to try to reshape the traditional model of Iran, and just the power that these landowners have had. And it happens without any violence, thus White Revolution. But again, you could argue that the results of the White Revolution are pretty mixed and really kind of on the borderline there in terms of the level of success. And on top of that, it begins this process of breaking down support for the Shah of Iran, which will peak in 1979 when there is a revolution that will throw the Shah out of power and bring into Iran a theocracy, a very hardline Islamic government, the same government who is basically there right now. And, a country that we have just had a very, very difficult relationship with since then. And, going back to 79 when they ended up taking a group of American embassy workers hostage. And yeah, we've had a history with them since. All right. Okay, let's see. What else do we have in here? We got some land reform in Latin America. What can we talk about there? We got Venezuela, a country that, kind of a same situation. Leaders, including Hugo Chavez, as you see there, kind of controversial guy, who's died a few years back, and he died of, I think it was cancer. But it's the same idea of wresting land away from wealthy landowners and trying to return it to the largely peasant population of Venezuela, and the government does get very seriously behind this, but there's I don't know, it's one of those where the end results are nothing that clean, and you can't really say big win for the poor people of Venezuela. People who see themselves being able to benefit will line up behind Chavez. Those who don't oppose him, and Venezuela is a country that, given its natural resources, especially in its oil resources, should be a very wealthy country nowadays, and continues to just have nothing. Even with Chavez no longer being there, more recent times, a lot of political turmoil and a country that seems to be economically kind of on the verge of bankruptcy. So land reform efforts that kind of like Iran, very, very mixed, and probably in the big scheme of things, we have to say, we get right down to it, not very successful. I'll add Guatemala onto that list. Also not successful. There were efforts that were made in the late 20th century, and particularly in the 1950s, to try to shift land over from not necessarily the wealthy landowners of Guatemala, but a lot of it was land that was owned by foreign businesses, especially coming from the U.S., the United Fruit Company, and the Guatemalan government trying to take that land, in effect, from the United Fruit Company, so that it could be redistributed to the poorer people and the native people of Guatemala. But that did not succeed. The financial, and because of that, if we're thinking a little kind of economic imperialism here, and political power of the United Fruit Company, was such that those plans never did come to any fruition. All right, a little bit of land reform in Asia and Africa. I guess, connecting back to what we already learned about with Vietnam during its role in the Cold War, again, after they freed themselves from the French and before the actual, the Vietnam War started, you had communists in North Korea led by Ho Chi Minh, and they immediately started this process of land distribution, and they were fairly successful with it, and really built up a huge kind of well of support for Ho Chi Minh and his communist government. Is that peasants who before then could work for the French on a plantation now had the ability to to own their own land. Um, Down in South Vietnam, which was more of a democratic style, the French were gone, but they had just almost given way to very wealthy South Vietnamese who now owned large farms, plantations, that sort of thing, and so not so much the effort on land distribution in South Vietnam. That'll look a little bit different after the end of the Vietnam War and the entire country becomes communist. All right, so a little bit on there. Ethiopia, flipping it over to Africa, and with Ethiopia. For a long time, and this is kind of going into we're really kind of focused on the 1970s. They had a leadership in there that was what we would call pro-Western, that was supported by the United States and some other Western powers, and kind of played nicey nice with us and those governments. But in the end, hold on, the dog needs out again. What's going on? Hold on. Thinking his dinner didn't settle well tonight. I don't know. Anyhow, talk about pro-Western leader. Well, in the 1970s, that leader is overthrown, and what replaces is a government in Ethiopia that is supported and backed up by the Soviet Union. Again, little aspect of the Cold War still playing out here. And even though, it doesn't like Ethiopia declares himself, like this fully communist country, but there's an effort under communist control to try for some of that land form reform and some of that redistribution. But like in many of these other examples I'm telling you about, it's a great idea. In reality, it doesn't seem to work out all that well. And so, let's see, do I have another one here for you? I'm trying to remember, do I have another one for you? Oh, yes, India. And we'll put India in there as well. After independence, because a lot of the best, real estate in India was under British control. And so in India, and I'm focused solely on India, not on Pakistan, but in India, there is that effort to do it. And there's mixed results. There's some parts of India where land redistribution will be relatively successful. And, you'll see some of the what had formerly been, more of the peasant class, some of the, in the caste system, having an opportunity to own some of their own land. But other parts, no, it's going to just pass over from kind of as it does in southern parts of Vietnam. It's going to pass from European control, from British control, to the control of wealthier Indians, and so you'll have that going on, right? So I think that covers us on some land reform, and it gets us to what I'm going to cover with you in Unit 8. Okay. And yep, I think that will have us ready for moving on to Unit 9 next week. And the Unit 9 is going to be another really fast run here. And then we'll be ready to catch a little review and have you ready for a test. All right. All right. I'm going to go attend to my dog and make sure he's okay. We'll see you.